Why is there a second key tucked behind the pegboard? The cold steel bit into her palm as she turned it slowly, the faded wooden handle creaking against decades of rust. Dust motes floated in the golden afternoon light, settling on old wrenches and sockets that hadn't been touched since her father's death. The deed to the property, wrinkled and yellowed, lay half-slipped from her leather jacket pocket, the ink barely legible, promising ownership of a building everyone, including her ex-husband, had long deemed worthless. The air smelled of oil, sawdust, and something metallic, a scent she could almost trace back to her father's hands. Her fingers lingered on a ledger edge poking out from beneath a stack of greasy rags, the first whisper that this shop might hold more than old tools and peeling paint. 3 days earlier, Maya had stood in her cramped apartment, counting the last $211 in her checking account, a thin stack of overdue bills trembling beneath her fingertips. The faded cardboard box she carried from the post office was stuffed with remnants of her life after divorce. A few coffee mugs, a chipped notebook, and the deed she had once mocked as a joke from her father's estate. Her 2001 Ford pickup wheezed down the cracked asphalt as she navigated toward the outskirts of town, tires crunching gravel, engine rattling like her own heartbeat. Each mile felt heavier. The air smelled of autumn leaves, damp and earthy, mixing with exhaust fumes, and the key in her pocket seemed to pulse with a weight she could not yet name. She glanced at the faded sign above the repair shop, letters chipped and gray against splintering wood, a relic no one wanted, yet now her only chance to salvage something real from a life unraveling. The door groaned under her push, revealing the gloom inside, shadows pooling around overturned chairs, scattered toolboxes, and a workbench she remembered from childhood summers. Maya knelt, brushing dust from a stack of old papers, a faint scrawl of her father's handwriting catching her eye. The ledger peeked out once more, a single corner sticking up like a warning. She breathed slowly, steadying her shaking hands, aware that every sound, the drip of water from the sagging roof, the faint hum of a faulty fluorescent light, the whisper of wind through a broken window, felt amplified, echoing through the hollow space. Then she noticed it. A small metal plate, just above the tool wall, scratched faintly with initials she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened. A chill ran down her spine. Who had been here, leaving a mark that had waited years for someone to find it? The ledger shifted slightly under her hand, as if nudging her attention. She exhaled slowly, brushing her fingers across the tiny plate, realizing that this neglected, abandoned repair shop might be holding secrets her father never spoke aloud, and that the first one had already just revealed itself. The echo of the ledger under her fingers still lingered as Maya stepped back, her eyes tracing the faint scratches on the metal plate above the tool wall. The morning sun through her apartment blinds had been merciless. $211 left in checking, 2 overdue electricity bills stacked unevenly like sentinels of failure, and a court summons from the bank folded into the corner of her kitchen counter. Her Ford pickup coughed when she started it. The dashboard cracked, the air freshener dangling like a limp reminder of better days. The eviction notice from her landlord fluttered against the door each time she passed. Its read "Notice to Vacate," screaming at her in the silent hallway. In the back seat of the pickup, a tattered cardboard box held her life condensed. A chipped coffee mug from her mother, a leather-bound notebook with months of penciled budgets, and a faded photo of her son Ethan, perched atop bills she hadn't been able to pay. The smell of damp wood and old paper from the suong she had just visited clung to her coat, a ghostly reminder that she was one step away from losing the last tether to her family's past. At the courthouse, her ex-husband's attorney had slid the settlement sheet across the table with a polite but biting smile, pushing the keys to the house toward her as if it were charity, while her ex kept the larger accounts, the savings, and the stories of her life wrapped in neatly signed documents. Her signature on the deed felt like signing away hope, yet she didn't flinch. She folded the paper carefully, slid it into her worn leather jacket, and adjusted the handle of her box. In the diner that afternoon, as she counted the small stack of dollar bills she had for lunch, the waitress whispered to the woman behind the counter that the old repair shop on Route 9 was junk. Nobody wants that place. The words were sharp but didn't pierce her resolve. Instead, Her eyes caught the edge of a second key protruding slightly from the side of the ledger she had tucked under the box, metal glinting in the fluorescent light. Her breath hitched. That tiny detail, almost invisible, hinted that the property she had been mocked for might hold more than dust and rust. Outside, the wind rattled the cracked sign of the repair shop, and the blue-gray sky pressed down on the small town like a weight, but the ledger and key rested in her grasp like a fragile promise. She exhaled slowly, counting the remaining bills again, hands steady despite the weight of humiliation, eviction, and debt, and realized this dilapidated, ridiculed shop might be her final chance to reclaim not just a building, but a fragment of dignity long denied. The second key stayed in Maya's palm long after she left the apartment, its cold edge pressing into her skin like it refused to be ignored. By the time she reached the county records office, her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the strange weight of something she couldn't yet name. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of metal counters, and a faded sign on the wall listed property transfer fees in faded black ink. She placed the worn deed on the counter, the paper creasing slightly at the corners where her grip had been too tight during the drive. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with thin-framed glasses, barely looked up at first, until her eyes landed on the parcel number. Something in her expression shifted, just for a second, like a flicker of recognition she quickly tried to hide. "Old repair shop on Route 9? She asked flatly, sliding the paper closer. "Nobody's touched that file in years." Behind Maya, a man in a contractor's jacket snorted softly and muttered, "That place is a money pit, not worth a single dollar." Maya didn't respond. She simply reached into her jacket and placed the last $211 in cash on the counter, counting it once, then twice, before letting it go as if it weighed more than it should. The clerk stamped the paperwork with a heavy, final sound that echoed through the small room, then slid the deed back toward her with a slight hesitation, as if she was handing over something she didn't fully understand. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass doors as Maya stepped into the parking lot, where her old pickup waited with a dull metallic groan, one tire slightly lower than the others. She slid into the driver's seat, the second key still in her pocket, and unfolded the county map she had taken from the clerk's counter without thinking. A faint red circle marked Route 9, barely visible, almost erased by time, as if someone had tried to make the location disappear. At the bottom of the map, a handwritten note in fading ink read, "Structure unstable. NO value recorded." She stared at those words longer than she should have, feeling the quiet insult behind them settle in her chest. Back inside the office, she had heard it clearly, the laughter, the dismissal, the way even the clerk had paused before handing over the deed, like she was transferring not property, but a burden. Yet none of it stopped her. The engine of her truck coughed as she turned the key, the dashboard flickering once before stabilizing. As she pulled onto the road, she noticed a man sitting alone at the far end of the records office bench, watching her through the glass. The moment her eyes met his, he stood abruptly, turned away, and left without collecting any papers. Maya didn't know why that bothered her more than the laughter or the warnings. The road toward Route 9 stretched ahead, cracked and empty, bordered by fields that looked forgotten by time. In her lap, the deed rested open, and the second key shifted slightly every time the truck hit a bump, as if it belonged somewhere she had not yet reached, but had somehow already been waiting for her. The second key slid against the edge of Maya's palm as she turned off. Route 9, the truck tires crunching over gravel that had long since swallowed what used to be pavement. Ahead, the repair shop emerged slowly through the trees like something half forgotten by time itself, its faded sign hanging crooked, letters nearly erased, only the word repair barely readable under layers of rust and sun damage. The front door groaned when she pushed it open, the sound long and hollow, like the building was exhaling after years of silence. Inside, the air was thick with oil, dust, and old gasoline, sharp enough to sting her throat as she stepped in. Sunlight cut through broken window panes in uneven beams, landing on a counter covered in a film of gray dust, where a coffee mug still sat upside down beside a rusted cash register. A wall calendar hung nearby, frozen on June 2012. The paper curled at the edges like burned parchment. Maya set her cardboard box down carefully on the floor. The sound echoed too loudly in the empty space. She pulled her jacket tighter, though the air wasn't cold. Just heavy, stagnant, like the building hadn't been breathed into in years. Her phone showed no signal, but she dialed anyway out of habit, listening to the silence before hanging up without waiting for it to ring through. In the corner, she unfolded a thin blanket from her box and placed it near a section of wall that looked slightly less damaged. Its paint newer than the surrounding boards, almost as if someone had patched it recently and tried to hide it. A row of lockers stood against the far wall, one dented and half open, with a faded name tag still clinging to the metal. The floor creaked under her steps, each sound revealing hollowness beneath, like empty space stretched under the wood. She noticed an old photograph frame face down behind the counter, glass cracked, showing only the corner of a smiling family she couldn't yet place. A faded open sign lay buried under dust near her boot, and when she brushed it aside, a faint draft moved through the room from somewhere it shouldn't have. Maya paused, holding her breath, then slowly walked toward the patched wall, noticing a thin line in the wood that didn't match the rest of the structure. She tapped it once, lightly, expecting nothing, but the sound that came back was not solid. It was hollow, like something waiting just beyond the surface, breathing quietly behind years of silence. The hollow sound from the patched wall still lingered in Maya's ears as she knelt on the warped floorboards, broom in hand, sweeping shards of broken glass into a dented dustpan. Each movement sent tiny clouds of gray floating in the slanting sunlight, landing on the creased ledger pages she had placed carefully nearby. Her hands were raw, cut along the knuckles where the broom had scraped the counter, and her knees ached against the cold, uneven wood. She reached for a rag and began wiping the countertop, smudging decades of oil and grime, revealing a faint carved initial, an A, deep in the wood grain, almost invisible under layers of dust. Outside, a thin drizzle tapped on the tin roof, a rhythmic, ghostly percussion that mingled with the hum of a failing fridge in the corner, its coils groaning as if complaining about years of neglect. Maya shifted to the windows, pulling a torn plastic sheet over the largest crack and taping it roughly to the warped frame, listening to the tape stick and stretch, the sound both fragile and resolute. She moved to a cabinet in the corner, trying the small brass key in the lock. It clicked but didn't turn, suggesting it was jammed from the inside. Setting the key down, she noticed an old receipt tucked in the drawer, ink faded, listing a customer she didn't recognize. Someone who had bought parts decades ago, maybe before she was born. Her eyes lingered on it, puzzled, and she slipped it into her jacket pocket, trying to rationalize it as nothing, yet her gut tightened. The floor creaked beneath her weight as she climbed onto the workbench to reach a leaking section of the ceiling, tugging a torn tarp over the sagging roof beam, fingers raw and trembling. She paused, listening. The soft drip of water onto the patched tarp, the faint whistle of wine through the cracked glass, and a small metallic clink that wasn't her own movement. Leaning closer, she spotted a thin edge of paper peeking from a gap beneath the counter, almost hidden. Could have been anything. A scrap, a note, a forgotten tool inventory. But the way it slid slightly as if disturbed by the vibrations of her cleaning made her pause. She exhaled slowly, letting her gaze drift over the space she was slowly claiming, noticing the angled sunlight across a partially filled toolbox, the bent handles of wrenches, the dust motes catching like tiny sparks in the air. One hand on the counter, one hand on the broom, she felt the weight of years pressing down, but also the quiet satisfaction of labor, the certainty that every sweep, every taped window, every careful rearrangement was reclaiming a place she could call hers. And then her eyes caught the corner of a ledger, barely sticking out from under a stack of oily rags, one page curling unnaturally, as if it had been waiting to be found. Maya realized that in cleaning the space, she was brushing against a secret that had lain hidden far longer than she had known. The metallic scent of oil and dust still hung in the air as Maya carefully stacked the empty cans she had found in the corner, the soft clink of aluminum echoing against the walls. A gentle knock came from the side door, and a gray-haired man stepped in, boots scuffing against the splintered floorboards. He wore a faded mechanic's jacket, and his eyes held a mix of curiosity and recognition. "I haven't seen anyone in here for years," he said softly, holding out a small canvas bag filled with nails and screws, as if offering a piece of the past back to her. Maya's gaze drifted across his hands, noticing the familiar calluses, the same kind her father had carried. "You knew my dad?" she asked, voice catching slightly. He hesitated, glancing at a corner where a photo leaned against the wall, face down, and murmured, "He helped a lot of people around here. Kept things running when nobody else would. Even that fire back in '98, His voice trailed off, and his eyes flicked toward the ledger she had uncovered, recognizing the edge of a page peeking from under a pile of rags. He nodded subtly at the page without speaking, acknowledging the connection between the documents and the man they both remembered. Maya followed his gaze, noting the faint initials scratched into the corner of a toolbox, matching the name he had whispered. "You're keeping it alive," he added, almost to himself, as he set the bag down beside her. She brushed her fingers over the cool metal of the second key in her pocket, the edges worn smooth from handling, and the clink of it against the ledger made him look up sharply, eyes narrowing for just a moment before softening. "Funny," he said, a shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "How some things were meant for someone who'd see them, even if they waited decades." Maya traced the faint scratches along the pegboard, feeling the memory pulse through the wall, the smell of sawdust and oil mingling with the lingering echo of laughter from summers past. The man reached out briefly to adjust a crooked shelf, leaving her with a sense of quiet reassurance. Yet his eyes lingered on a corner of the workshop where the patch of newer paint didn't quite match, and she sensed he knew more than he let on. As he turned to leave, he patted the top of a locker near the back and whispered, "Your father's touch is still here. Don't lose it," before vanishing into the dim light filtering through cracked windows. Maya stared at the locker, the faint dent in its metal glinting where the afternoon sun hit it, and for the first time she realized that this shop wasn't just abandoned wood and rusted steel. It was a living fragment of a past carefully preserved, waiting for someone who could recognize it. The mechanic's words still lingered in Maya's mind as she stood alone in the repair shop, the silence now heavier than dust. The rain outside had turned steady, tapping against the warped metal roof in a slow, uneven rhythm, like something trying to speak through the rust. She moved back toward the center of the room, flashlight in hand, and that was when she noticed it again. The faint line on the floorboard near the counter wasn't just a crack. It was too straight, too intentional. She knelt, brushing away layers of grime, revealing that one plank was newer than the rest, slightly off color, as if replaced long after the shop had closed. Her breath slowed. The pattern was forming now, impossible to ignore. The patched wall, the hollow sound, the misaligned floorboard. Something was connected. She tapped it once with the handle of a screwdriver. A dull echo came back from beneath, different from the solid thud of surrounding wood. She stood, moving to the tool wall the same mechanic had looked at too quickly before leaving. Her flashlight beam slid across it, and she saw it clearly now. One section of the pegboard had been repainted, but the edges didn't match. The nails were newer. Even the dust settled differently, as if air moved behind it. Maya ran her fingers along the surface, then pressed firmly. Nothing. She stepped back, heart tightening, trying to convince herself it was just old construction, just a shop with bad repairs. But then the freezer in the back let out a low, empty hum, even though it wasn't plugged into anything. She froze. Slowly, she walked toward it, crouching beside the heavy metal unit. The back panel was colder than the rest of the room, unnaturally so, and when she knocked, the sound wasn't solid. It echoed, hollow, like space behind it. Outside, a car passed slowly down Route 9. She caught a glimpse through the cracked window. A dark sedan, unfamiliar, lingering too long before continuing on. She told herself it was nothing, just coincidence, but her grip tightened on the flashlight. Returning to the wall, she compared it to the map she had unfolded earlier. The faint red circle the clerk had marked wasn't random. It aligned almost perfectly with the patched section of wall. Her pulse quickened. She crouched again, this time tracing the edge where the pegboard met the frame, until her nail caught on something small. A notch. Not natural. Not wear. Intentional. She pressed it, then pulled. Nothing moved. She tried again, sliding her fingers slightly lower, where the wood felt just a fraction looser than the rest. And then she heard it. A soft metallic shift behind the wall, like a latch waking up after years of silence, answering her touch for the first time. The soft metallic shift behind the wall grew louder as Maya held her breath, her fingers still pressed against the hidden notch. For a moment, nothing happened. Only the rain outside and the distant groan of the old building settling into itself. Then, with a slow, reluctant surrender, the pegboard gave way. She stepped back instinctively as a narrow panel swung inward, releasing a breath of stale, trapped air that smelled like machine oil and sealed paper. Inside the hollow space was not treasure, not dust alone, but a small metal lockbox bolted to the inner frame, its surface scratched and dulled with age. Her flashlight trembled slightly as she aimed it inside. The box was heavier than it looked, and when she reached for it, the cold metal bit into her palms like it had been waiting for her touch specifically. She knelt on the floorboards, the sound of rain now louder through the opened cavity, and examined the lock. An old brass mechanism with faint initials etched into the corner. Her heart tightened. She had seen that mark before, somewhere in the shop, but couldn't place it yet. Carefully, she tried the second key from her pocket. It didn't fit at first. She exhaled sharply, adjusting the angle, and pushed again. This time, the lock clicked. The sound echoed in the hollow wall like a gunshot in an empty room. The box opened with resistance, revealing a stack of aged documents bound by a frayed string. The top paper was a ledger page, edges curled and stained with what looked like old motor oil. Numbers carefully written in a hand she immediately recognized but couldn't yet name. Beneath it, a property deed, yellowed, official, stamped with a county seal so faded it barely held its shape. Her fingers paused before turning the next page. A name appeared at the top of the ledger entry, written in bold, uneven ink, E. Harper. Maya froze. That surname echoed somewhere deep in her memory, tied to conversations she hadn't thought about in years. She sat back against the floor, the box resting open on her knees, rain tapping harder now as if urging her forward. Slowly, she unfolded another document, her breath tightening as she saw repeated numbers. Same parcel code as the repair shop, same address stamped in different years, as if the place had been quietly rewritten on paper long before she ever arrived. Photo slipped out and landed face up on the floorboards. It was faded, Polaroid style, showing the repair shop in its early days. Her father standing beside another man whose face she couldn't fully make out. Maya's hands shook, but she forced herself to take a photo of everything with her cracked phone camera before folding the documents carefully back into place. Then she hesitated, staring at the ledger one last time before slipping it into her jacket as footsteps echoed faintly outside. Too slow, too deliberate to be random. And as she glanced down at the bottom corner of the deed, one line made her stomach drop completely. Transfer authorized by Maya Coleman. The words on the bottom of the deed refused to leave Maya's vision. Even as she sat on the cold workshop floor, the lockbox open in her lap and rain pressing softly against the tin roof like a distant heartbeat. Transfer authorized by Maya Coleman. Her throat tightened. She read it again, slower this time, as if the ink might change under pressure. Her hands moved instinctively to the ledger, pulling it back into the dim cone of her phone's flashlight. The pages smelled faintly of oil and old paper, but beneath that was something else. Soap, maybe, or the clean metallic scent of engine tools her father used to carry home. The name at the top of one entry still burned in her mind, E. Harper. She whispered it under her breath, testing it against memory, and the sound felt both familiar and impossible. From the ledger, she traced lines of handwritten notes. Payments not labeled as profit, but as repairs for families, loaned parts. No charge, Harper decision. Small numbers, inconsistent with business records, yet repeated with quiet intention, like someone had been keeping a second history hidden beneath the official one. The mechanic's voice from earlier returned to her memory. the way he had avoided her eyes when he mentioned her father helping people. Now she understood why he hadn't finished the sentence. Maya carefully unfolded a brittle envelope tucked inside the lockbox. Inside were receipts, gas station invoices, hospital pharmacy slips, and handwritten notes from local names she recognized. From town, all marked paid by EH or simply crossed out with a single line, as if debt itself had been erased. One receipt made her pause. A pediatric pharmacy bill, dated nearly 20 years ago, carrying a partial signature she recognized with a jolt that made her hand tremble. Her father's handwriting, unmistakable in its uneven pressure, had written covered in full. She pressed the paper flat against her knee, the edges crinkling under her fingers, and suddenly the repair shop didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt occupied by invisible history. A photo slipped from the stack, older than the others, showing her father standing outside this same building. Not alone, but with a group of children holding small repair tools. Smiling in front of a banner she could barely read. Community Workshop Day. The man in the mechanic's jacket flashed through her mind again. His hesitation, the way he had avoided the name E. Harper. There was something he wasn't saying. Something heavy enough to silence even memory. Maya leaned back against the wall, the ledger open across her knees, and noticed for the first time that several pages had been torn out. Not randomly, but cleanly, as if someone had deliberately removed a record. Her pulse quickened. If her father had been helping people quietly, why erase parts of it? Why hide what looked like a lifetime of giving behind locked walls and false abandonment? And then she saw it again, in the corner of a faded receipt pressed under the ledger. A stamped county seal with the same name she had seen earlier on the deed transfer file. One that made her stomach tighten with a slow, uncertain dread. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of something larger forming around her. Something that made the shop feel less like an abandoned structure and more like a sealed chapter someone had tried very hard to forget. And as her fingers hovered over the ledger one more time, she realized her father hadn't simply left her a building, but a question no one had ever dared to answer. The ledger felt heavier now, not in weight but in meaning, as Maya sat in the dim workshop light with its pages spread across. The floor like fragments of a buried life. Her phone camera had already filled with photos, parcel numbers, handwritten notes, stamped receipts, but it was the consistency that made her chest tighten. Every entry, every line, circled back to the same thing. Land that was never supposed to be, just a repair shop. She traced one record again, slower this time, her finger stopping at a county parcel code that matched the deed exactly. But beneath it, in a second ink, was a classification she had never seen before. Easement reserved private trust allocation. Her breath caught. Trust allocation wasn't something you found in a rundown garage ledger. That was legal structure, ownership structure, protection structure. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the warped floor, and crossed the room to the wall map she had ignored earlier. The paper was brittle, taped at the corners, but when she shined her flashlight over it, the same parcel number appeared again. This time circled in red, old ink bleeding slightly into the fibers. Someone had marked this place as important long before it became worthless. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, tapping against the broken window like impatient fingers. Maya pulled the lockbox closer, opening the bank envelope she hadn't fully examined yet. Inside were faded deposit slips. Small amounts, regular intervals, always signed H. She compared the signature to the ledger again, then to the deed. It was the same hand, the same pressure on the pen. Her father hadn't just run a shop. He had moved money quietly through it, structured like something far more deliberate than a local business. Her mind tried to rationalize it as kindness, donations, informal help, but the legal language didn't match charity. It matched protection. A low hum from the freezer behind her startled her, and she turned sharply, realizing it had no power source connected. Still, it vibrated faintly, as if something inside the building itself was resonating with what she was uncovering. Then her phone buzzed. A known number. No message. Just a second later, another call, same number. She didn't answer. Instead, she zoomed in on a photo she had taken earlier of the deed and froze. The county seal in the corner wasn't just old. It was marked with a secondary stamp, reviewed, legal hold. That kind of designation didn't belong to abandoned property. It belonged to contested value, to disputed ownership, to something someone had once tried to bury in paperwork. Her fingers tightened around the ledger as she heard the crunch of tires outside the shop. Slow, deliberate, stopping just short of the entrance. Through the cracked glass, headlights cut across the floorboards like blades. A car she didn't recognize sat idle on the dirt road, engine still running, as if waiting. And in the silence that followed, Maya understood something she hadn't wanted to admit. The repair shop wasn't being rediscovered. It was being watched again, and whatever value she had just uncovered was no longer history. It was active. The headlights outside the repair shop stayed motionless for exactly 7 seconds before the engine finally cut off, leaving only the rain and the low creak of cooling metal. Maya didn't move. She stood with the ledger still open in her hands, its pages slightly damp from the air, as the sound of boots approached the door with controlled certainty. The knock wasn't urgent. It was practiced. 2 soft taps, then a pause, then another. When the door opened, it wasn't violence that entered. It was order. A man in a tailored coat stepped inside, holding a thin folder sealed with a county ribbon. Behind him, Maya recognized the second figure immediately. Her ex-husband, calm as ever, his expression carefully neutral, like he had rehearsed this moment somewhere far away. "We didn't expect you to find this place so quickly," the lawyer said first, eyes scanning the room without lingering on anything too long. "There's been a development regarding the property classification." He placed the folder on the counter, sliding it toward her without touching dust or oil. "This shop has been flagged for reassessment. Structural liability concerns, safety violations, and unresolved title ambiguity." Her ex stepped forward slightly, hands folded. "Maya, this isn't personal," he said gently, almost apologetically. "It's just that the property has value now, more than anyone thought. We're trying to make sure everything is handled fairly." The word fairly landed heavier than anything else in the room. Maya didn't open the folder yet. Instead, she looked at him, at the same man who once called this place worthless, who signed away control under that exact assumption. "Fair," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There's an offer already on the table. A development group is willing to purchase the site for cleanup and redevelopment. The county is prepared to approve transfer once all parties sign." He pushed a single-page agreement toward her. The paper was clean, sterile, completely unlike the ledger still in her hands. Her ex added, "It's for the family, Maya. We can't keep holding on to something unsafe. You've seen the condition of the structure." Outside, the rain hit harder as if responding. Maya finally set the ledger down and opened the folder. Inside were printed photos of the shop, marked with red annotations, violation codes, and timestamps she immediately recognized as recent. Too recent to match the story they were telling. One document caught her eye, a partial deed copy, stamped reconstructed record. With a signature line faintly altered, her fingers slowed. The handwriting wasn't her father's alone. There was another mark beside it, initials she had seen before in the ledger, tied to entries that had suddenly disappeared from earlier pages. "This is a clerical correction," the lawyer said quickly, noticing her focus. "Nothing unusual." But Maya was already scrolling through the photos she had taken earlier. One ledger page was missing from her sequence now. She had photographed it. She was certain of it. And yet, here it was gone. Her ex stepped closer, voice lowering slightly. "Maya, you don't have the resources to fight this. If you cooperate now, you can avoid unnecessary legal pressure." His tone stayed calm, almost kind. "We're trying to help you avoid losing everything again." That sentence hung longer than the others. Again, Maya closed the folder slowly, her hand brushing the second key in her pocket. She didn't sign. Instead, she pulled out her phone and took a photo of every page, every stamp, every signature line before anyone could touch them again. Outside, the headlights that had been watching earlier flickered back on, illuminating the rain like broken glass. And as the lawyer reached forward as if to reclaim the documents, Maya realized they were no longer asking her to leave. They were preparing to take what they now knew she had already begun to understand. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and polished wood. The fluorescent lights reflecting faintly on stacks of paper and folders spread across the table. Maya set the ledger and deed down carefully, their corners slightly bent from handling, and the room seemed to inhale around her. The lawyer's hand froze above the stack of corrected deeds he had intended to push toward her, a faint tremor betraying his calm demeanor. Maya opened the ledger first, turning to the page that listed E. Harper's entries for repairs and payments, numbers repeated precisely, matching receipts she had photographed earlier. She tapped the ledger with a finger. "These were never mistakes," she said softly, voice steady. Her ex-husband leaned forward, attempting to interject about procedural irregularities, the clerical error he had invoked so many times. But his words faltered when she laid the deed atop the ledger. County-stamped, inked with her father's authentic signature, sealed with a mark only she had seen before in the shop. The room went silent as she pulled the Polaroid from the lockbox, placing it next to the ledger. A faded image of her father standing with children outside the repair shop, one hand resting on the toolbox where she had found the key. "That day. This office never knew he did this," she said, lifting her gaze to the others. The mechanic from town, standing at the back, nodded subtly, confirming the story with a quiet weight that carried more authority than any spoken word. The lawyer tried again, citing county procedure, the property's supposed unsafe classification, her lack of legal representation, but she countered by placing the original receipts, the ledger photos, and the deed in front of him. The pen in his hand hovered, frozen. A copy of the deed bore a faint, forged signature. He had tried to insert it as evidence of her incompetence, but the original now sat unmistakably in her hand. Her ex opened his mouth to speak of family property and fairness, but Maya pointed to the ledger entry where his name was listed alongside adjustments he had made without authorization. The faint smudge of ink on the page caught in the overhead light like a spotlight, and his face went pale. She unfolded a small, crumpled envelope containing a bank statement tucked in the ledger months ago, showing a trust account her father had quietly maintained, and laid it beside the deed. Even the developer's agent in the corner stopped mid-gesture, realizing the documents contradicted every attempt to diminish the shop's significance. Maya's pulse slowed just enough to notice the hum of the air conditioner, the quiet click of her phone camera as she captured each page for record, and the room felt heavier, charged. Every attempt to argue, every hint of procedural authority or practical dismissal, dissolved against the weight of evidence in front of them. She wasn't weak, she wasn't a bystander, and this property, this junk, was no longer a footnote. The ledger, the deed, the photo, the receipts, they spoke with undeniable clarity. And as the lawyer lowered his gaze, the ex-husband's jaw tightened, and the developer's pen stilled above the contract. Maya realized that the first layer of justice had been claimed, but now the choice lay with her. What would she do with the legacy that had waited silently, patiently, for her to recognize its true power? The morning sunlight filtered through the patched windows of the repair shop, dust motes floating like tiny sparks in the air, illuminating the space that had once been derided as worthless. Maya held the second key in her hand, its cold metal now familiar, a talisman of persistence rather than rust, and slipped it into the lock of the front door, turning it with steady fingers. The deed lay spread across the workbench, freshly stamped and signed, the county seal restored, now a concrete affirmation that ownership and history were finally acknowledged. Across the room, the ledger rested open, its pages no longer evidence of debt but proof of intention, generosity, and quiet endurance. The old journal beside it, its edges crisp under new binding, now chronicled her father's life of silent community stewardship. Footsteps approached softly, familiar and kind. The retired mechanic, neighbors, even a few of the children who had once visited the shop years ago, all quietly setting boxes of supplies, fresh paint, and mended tools in place, their eyes reflecting acknowledgement and respect. Maya moved to the counter and placed an old photograph of her father at the center, the Polaroid's faded faces now a focal point of memory and continuity, and she felt the weight of generations settle around her like a warm embrace. Outside, The ex-husband waited briefly at the edge of the lot, face pale but measured, watching as the deed and ledger remained untouched in her control. A silent acknowledgement passed between them that whatever power he had once held was now obsolete. The bank letter confirming the trust account had been opened correctly, the funds directed as her father intended, rested beside the ledger, a legal and symbolic restoration of honor. Maya straightened the repair sign on the front facade, its letters catching the morning sun for the first time in years, then opened the main door fully, stepping through the threshold with deliberate certainty. She carried the key, the deed, the journal, no longer mere paper and metal, but tangible proof that she had been entrusted, that her efforts, patience, and resilience had vindicated not only herself but the legacy of her father. The workshop, once filled with shadows and neglect, now felt inhabited by a living memory. The smell of fresh paint mingled with oil and wood, and the faint hum of the repaired freezer in the corner punctuated the quiet heartbeat of restoration. As she looked around, seeing the community returning in subtle gestures of support, the ledger, key, and deed aligned before her, she understood with a calm clarity. This junk had never been worthless. It had been waiting for the right person, someone capable of endurance, of recognition, of care, to unlock its true worth, and in doing so, restore both a home and a legacy that would endure long past her own days.